Hi. So today I would like to try to see if we can talk about an interesting concept called discernment, and in particular how discernment seems to show up in the context of the distinction between broadcast media and decentralized media. So first, let's start with discernment. The concept is a a particular way of being able to make subtle distinctions, nuanced distinctions, but clear and with confidence. So, in a very prosaic way, you might say that, for example, a person who's become very familiar with and has dealt for a very long time in, say, fashion can quickly and effectively discern the difference between a well-made dress and a poorly made dress. He or she could uh, tell by the feel that the fabric is high quality. You could tell by the look that the workmanship was well done, and by hypothesis could also tell that the style of construction was also well done. Right? So this is discernment in a particular domain. I, for example, have developed a certain degree of ability to discern um, different qualities of coffee. Um, I think that is pretty straightforward. And the proposition here is that discernment is a distinct capacity. We might say that using the sovereignty model, it's a bit like a way of very fully perceiving with a very broad and clear set of distinct ways of perceiving. So it's you see with your eyes and your ears and with touch, and by the way, with your mind and with your cognition, and then integrating these very carefully into a clear sense of what's what. So that's discernment. As it seems pretty clear, this is not a trivial thing to develop. It takes time. It takes actual practice in the world, and it takes an ability to really clearly listen to all the ways that you and your body are able to perceive and send signals. In fact, one of the biggest challenges to discernment is um, not being able to listen to your own gut, for example, or to what one might call your intuition. But if you can really tune into all the different ways that your body and mind perceive, and then allow those to speak clearly, and then integrate that into a single signal, you've now developed a certain capacity, the capacity of discernment. Okay, so holding that, now let's step to the next concept, the distinction between broadcast media and decentralized media. So in broadcast media, we have an interesting situation, which is, I discuss it in some detail in a Medium post called Understanding the Blue Church. But the idea is this: you have one speaker and many, many listeners. So there's an asymmetry in communication. And also, it's more or less one way, meaning that the speaker speaks, the signal goes from the speaker to the listeners, and effectively no signal goes from the listeners to the speaker. And in general, because of these characteristics, most specifically asymmetry, there's a relatively small number in the total universe of speakers and a relatively large number of listeners. And so what happens is that the kind of the responsibility or the division of labor between speaker and listener shows up with a certain set of requirements, which is to say that your job as a listener is to listen well, to receive that which is being spoken, which is being expressed, um, and to be able to do something with it. Oftentimes, to simply be able to repeat it back with fidelity. Right? So this is sort of the broadcast mode when applied in, say, news or in, say, school, is of that sort. Right? Your job is to hear what the teacher says, and then when tested, to be able to repeat it back with clarity. Right? That's what we're taught in how to deal with broadcast. And because there's no expectation or notion or intention of being able to have interaction, which is to say signal back, that's more or less it. And so what we might say is that in the I can't remember if it was a video or a post or both, on the distinction between thinking and simulated thinking. Within the broadcast modality, we broadly find ourselves selecting for simulated thinking, that our job is to be able to do pattern recognition, to build a schema that maps to whatever was broadcast, be able to recognize when and where a particular piece of some broadcast information is being signaled, and then respond in whatever is the appropriate coded fashion. And I'm going to now call that particular style judgment. So judgment is a little bit like the way a database works. Right? So I send some signal, and this signal acts as an indicator of where in the database I'm supposed to look to find the answer. So good judgment operates quickly. It recognizes the pattern correctly. It then accesses the appropriate location to get the right answer, and then it pulls the right answer out correctly. Right? So that's good judgment, and that is a piece of simulated thinking. And there's a linkage. It's not obligate, but it's very close. It's very closely related between broadcast as a modality of communication and judgment as a mode of perception. So then when I now talk about decentralized communication, this is a different characteristic. In decentralized communication, there is at least a rough symmetry between speakers and listeners, or expressors and receivers. It may not be fully symmetric. There may, somebody on, say, YouTube has more of a Pareto distribution or even a power law distribution, but it's not foreclosed. Case in point, this video. A year ago, I was not speaking at all through YouTube, and now I am. And so the possibility, at least, is open for fully symmetric access to this capacity to express. And as those of you know who've left comments, the expectation of interactivity is, again, at least in potential, very high, and in practice is much higher than in a broadcast modality. So in a decentralized medium, you have a roughly symmetric capacity, and while it is not fully symmetric actuality, it at least is more in that direction than in broadcast. And you also have an expectation of both a capacity for interaction and some realization of that. And so then we'll close the loop, that if judgment as a style of perception maps to broadcast, then what I would like to propose is that discernment as a style maps to decentralized media, which is to say that in decentralized media, there are many, many, many things to listen to, many channels. The number of people on YouTube and the number of videos on YouTube that I can choose to interact with is enormous, unmanageable. By contrast, take, for example, the number of television programs on TV when I was a kid, 3, 4, if you were tuning into the UHF band. Well, it's just a very different challenge. And so in order to be able to make sense of a decentralized medium, you need to actually be able to develop discernment. You need to be able to have a better sense of that which furthers and that which does not. The ability to make a distinction between an expression that is frankly worth your time and attention and an expression that is not. And I'd like in the last maybe few minutes to double down on that, because I suspect and expect that one of the great and powerful possibilities that is arising now is the development of what we might call a discernment engine or collective discernment. And here I want to hold it very lightly and with some precision. So I'm asking for some discernment. One of the things that seems to be happening a lot right now is that people who have not yet learned the distinction between thinking and simulated thinking, between judgment and discernment, are using judgment in relationship to decentralized expression. And as a consequence, what happens is they don't listen closely. They don't honor, for example, that which is good or clear or helpful in a particular expression, and instead apply the coarse-grained, repeat or shut down stuff that happens in judgment. Right? And judgment is it's crude. It has a very small number of boxes. It's very much plays into cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias. Whereas what discernment does is discernment listens closely to try to suss out the essence of that which is endeavoring to express itself, and then, where possible, upregulates it, because you have the capacity for interactivity. You have the capacity to point out that which does connect, that which sounds like it is, in some sense, true or real or deep or honest, and give that more energy, give that more attention. And this can be, again, at the level of, say, a given expression. Like, you could choose this video and say this video has a certain sensibility to it that I would like to point people to, or I would like to interact with myself. And you can even do it at a finer grain. You can say this particular piece of what is being said or spoke speaks to me in a certain way. And so in collective discernment, if we can figure out a way how to develop that and hand it off, what ends up happening is there is a gradient. If you recall the video that talked about fitness landscapes, collective discernment creates a hill. It creates a new niche. It creates a niche for speaking truthfully. It creates a niche for expressing with honesty and with clarity and with depth in a way that broadcast doesn't. Broadcast doesn't have a capacity for selecting for those kinds of expressions. And so if we are able to, and if we choose to enter into a relationship of collective discernment, and if enough of us do, and if we use that, the power of interaction, the power to choose to express on our own, to identify and upregulate that which furthers, and to point attention away from that which does not, we should expect that we will begin to see more of that which we like, that's what we want, that which we need, and less of that which we do not. And so we begin to get an interesting sense of how the loop closes here, that the first requirement, or the first step, is to become capable of discernment, to become capable of noticing, for example, what are the limits of your own sovereignty? When are you reacting to things? When are you shifting into a judgment perception schema and not listening, but rather simply categorizing and reacting to things that oftentimes were not even yours to begin with? And when are you listening with discernment and then skillfully adding your insight and your attention, your wisdom, to those things that should be brought more broadly and shared more fully and consciously? I think that's all.